I've lived 1,000 lives. I've piloted 1,000 souls. I've killed and fought and died just for another role.
This is the Happy Jacks RPG podcast, a roundtable discussion that's a mix of friendship, humor, unbridled enthusiasm, and tabletop RPG topics sent in from around the world.
Just for another role.
Hello, and welcome to the Happy Jacks Advice Podcast, Season 34, Episode 15. I am a fool, and that should sound a lot better now. I'm Pooja, standing in for Kimmy, because Kimmy is not feeling well, unfortunately, so everyone hope that Kimmy feels better soon.
I'm Riley, and I'm just here to be here.
I'm Sam D. I'm also here.
Yay. Okay, in today's episode, we have Kara from Turkey asks about language-independent games. Always Nevers asks about players short-circuiting an adventure. And from the Archive 2020, Juho from Finland wants to know if TNT really has to require so many roles. If you'd like to contribute a question or story to the show, email us at happyjacksrpg@gmail.com or post in the mailbag channel of the Discord. And just join the Discord in general. It's a fun place. Lots of great people in there. And please write in. Our topic selection is running kind of slow. So if you've been on the fence about whether to write into the show or not, now is your opportunity to just give us your questions, give us your experiences.
Write
If you
those
want to humble
letters.
brag, do that.
We'll listen to it. We'll talk about it. We'll chat about it.
What are the best kinds of questions to send into the show? What are your favorite kinds of questions to get?
Oh, there's a lot. I don't know. Because almost anything can spark a conversation. So I think we've had some good questions about sometimes it'll be oh, we had this incident at our table. How do you deal with something like this? We've also had people who talk about finding their joy in games again after a long break. And so that can also be really fun. And we had one last time that was very fun. That was what is the thing that you say to yourself prior to your game starting to get psyched up for it? And that
That
kicked off some fun
is great.
information. Yeah.
Now that I've had this experience, I have to say that the ones I like the most are the ones that are directly addressed to me. But I mean, that was just really great. Sorry, I was like, holy shit, I've leveled up as a human. But in general, just anything that interests you or that you have that you would want to have a discussion with your friends about. It's all about the conversation. We do have some announcements. We have some spooky one-shots coming up. You can tune in Saturday, October 12th, and for an Under the Autumn Strangely one-shot run by creator Graham Gentz, and Sunday, October 13th, for Asking for a Dead Friend run by Artem. Both will be added to the one-shot feed and the YouTube channel soon after if you aren't able to watch live. Game Days is happening in November. Visit the Happy Jacks Discord to vote on the exact day. And that is happyjacks.org/Discord. Game Days is a lot of fun. Always have a nice variety of systems and people and all the things. We're in October now. Yeah. October's Indie Designer of the Month is Audrey Stoltz, aka Lady Tabletop.
Stolzy.
Sorry.
She's my very good friend. We love Audrey. Love her.
Yep.
Stolzy. I'm so glad that we have you on the show so you can save me from making a fool of myself. Audrey's pronouns are she, they. Lady Tabletop is a queer game designer, writer, editor, and graphic layout designer. She publishes games through a small press that she co-founded, Hope Punk Press, as well as solo creations on itch.io. They like to publish games about love, hope, and weirdness. You can find Lady Tabletop's games at ladytabletop.itch.io and at Hope Punk happyjacksrpg.com. They also run a solo game podcast called Alone at the Table, which you should definitely check out. This week, we are discussing spaceships and star worms. Or whims. Which was co-authored by Ben Quiggins?
I don't know Ben, but let's go with Quiggins.
Okay.
Quaggins. Oh, no, I don't know. Qui-Gon Jinns.
A wiry human woman guns the throttle of a contraband military vessel while navigating through an asteroid field. Her co-pilot, a round, squat creature with one eye on a long stalk, gleefully fires the ship's plasma cannon at the pursuing bounty hunters. Spaceships and Star Worms, with a Y, is a comprehensive 5th edition supplement that gives you nearly 400 pages of science fiction flavor and rules to transform your 5e experience. The S&S Core Sourcebook provides everything you need to play in and run all sorts of science fiction adventures, from space operas to cyberpunk runs to exploration missions and everything in between. So buckle up, spacers, and get ready to dive in at warp speed. Spaceships and Star Worms is available on hopepunkpress.com and DriveThruRPG for $20, which for a 400-page source book with that much, like...
That's a lot. That's a good deal for that.
That's a really great deal, I feel like, and something I'm really excited about. I love me some space stories in general, so...
Me too.
Like...
Playing one right now, so I quite like it.
Ooh.
Who wants to take mailback one?
I'll go for it. You just had to read a lot, and I'll. Is this your first time on the show?
No, it's my second.
Okay.
I
Well, then
came
you
here
go
once-
for it. No.
I came here once with just Kimmy, and this is a different experience. So go on.
Excellent. All right. Hello, hosts. I love story games. I live and game in Turkey, where a lot of the people I play RPGs with aren't very fluent in English. This is a problem because I can't put most PBTA playbooks in front of them and have them figure it out. When a game is very language dependent, playing it in a foreign language means either I need to translate the play material beforehand or translate things as they come up at the table. I don't have the time and energy to do the former, and the latter is a cognitive load at the table on my ADHD brain. Also, I feel that all the text being channeled through my understanding of it at the moment alters what makes these games awesome at inspiring, imaginative, dramatic moments. After having played 2 sessions of Spire and then having a few turbulent PBTA sessions, I'm now surprised and a bit delighted to find out how much the single word skills and resistances, sorry, got a little tongue-tied there, speaking of language, at the core of player actions simplify things. Though Spire abilities can be a bit similar to your average PBTA playbook move, a lot of them were relatively easy to translate before play. 1d6 stress to shadow is just more accessible language-wise than you're gone, but you leave something behind or take something with you. This is not a value judgment. I really love a lot of PBTA games. Now, I'm designing a Sparked by Resistance game. The Resistance Toolbox is what powers Spire and Heart, and I chose it for my game because it's made to support games about desperate struggle, and that's where it's at for me. I want to make it even more language independent, hopefully. What are the most language-independent games you've played? Can you think of any low language dependency mechanics or design ideas? Thank you for the fun, inspiring show and being part of this exciting, caring community. P.S. To be fair, that's from Karim. P.S. To be fair, Spire puts some central wordier stuff like Fallout on the GM side of things. So I guess what I'm looking for is keeping the word count lower on the material facing the non-GM players.
No, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I think, like, I only have played in English, so
Yeah,
it
me
is
too.
really
Yeah.
like a new thing to think about, like, okay, what is dependent in terms of you understanding what's going on and, like, the mechanics of it.
I have been really interested lately in, like, just simpler games kind of at large. And I think I can't really speak to translation. I only speak English, but I feel like there's probably a lot of overlap between games with just fewer rules and simpler games at large than something like Apocalypse World or whatever, where you're going to have all these materials in there.
Yeah.
But I can imagine playing, For the Queen, it's got like a bunch of language in there because it's a game, but like if you're gonna draw a card and then it's one sentence to translate on the fly,
Yeah.
and then like you can get back into the game, that feels that kind of prompt-based play seems like a solid way to go, maybe.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Or, I mean, not for stuff like at a larger table, but I feel like a lot of solo RPG are blah 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 blah. I feel like a lot of solo games would be would lend themselves to kind of like a translation friendly game if you have someone who is fluent in both languages.
Yeah.
I think this is gonna sound weird, but hear me out.
Yeah.
Is games like Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, and Trail of Cthulhu, where the skills that you have to deal with as a player are actually really simple. And most of the, like, and so if you translate, like, the character sheet, the skills kind of speak for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it would put a little bit more onus on the GM in terms of character creation as you're explaining to people what they're doing and needing to translate that way. But I feel like in terms of gameplay, it goes back to that thing. It's really simple on the gameplay front and what you're using because you just have already translated the one word skills that people have, and then they're deciding how to use those.
I can see that. So yeah, it feels like a game that has very like clear delineations of what's happening. As long as you have the wherewithal to translate all those things, that would be good. That might not be as useful for Karem, who says like doing that kind of pre-planning might be too much work for him.
Yeah.
But I do think that is overall a good thing. And I think going off of your thing about simpler games, I think possibly like your Grant Howitt style one sheet games would play really well because like if you're playing, Honey Heist, it's very easy to like translate the concepts of bear or criminal, like and the broad spectrum of that. Or if you're playing something along the lines of
Lasers and feelings.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Same
What's a
deal.
laser? What's a feeling? Yeah. And so I think that kind of thing, and then you're as long as you can still communicate what's happening in a scene to people, which is going to be something you're going to deal with in any sort of role-playing game, which you're probably dealing with Spire as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think a simple dice system that really doesn't require a lot of translation. So I think it's it's like either a system where you can cleanly translate the entire thing ahead of time when it's more complicated,
And
or
it's
a system
just one thing for everybody.
Yeah.
I think it's the reason why I think Call of Cthulhu or one of those types of games
Yeah, I
might be
agree.
interesting for that because it's just like everybody's got the same character sheet and you're really just saying like it's a one-to-one translation for these single words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think like it's not something I ever thought about before, and I find it really interesting. Like you're like for PBTA specifically, a lot of those games, I'm thinking like Mass and stuff like that, those moves are so involved.
Yeah.
They're dense.
They're very esoteric.
And the individual language of those games is often what makes them really feel magical. Like Apocalypse World, if you take out the phrase psychic maelstrom, like the game just gets worse, right? And you're gonna have to do the translation work, not just to literally translate that, but to try to capture the poetry of that too, that's embedded in so many of those moves.
Yeah. And a lot of those games too are specifically designed to like cultural touchstones that they're assuming the audience, the table is all familiar with, because they're all very genre specific to whatever that particular skin of PBTA is going to be. So like Mask is about like teenage superheroes, specifically teenage superheroes, right?
Yes.
It's not just like superheroes as a concept, it's specifically the teenage angst of superheroes. And similarly, like what's it called? What's the horny teenage monster game?
Monster
Monster
Hearts.
Monster Hearts. Yeah, the Monster Hearts.
Yeah.
Monster Hearts is like specifically designed to be like, this kind of romance thing. And Monster of the Week is designed on Monster of the Week shows. And so it's really going to be a matter of, does this other culture also have those things as touchstones? Like, have they been watching American style TV, like dramas, or, if you're playing somewhere like, in the Netherlands, you might be getting much more of like a hard-boiled detective series kind of thing happening, and like if you're living in the UK, it's going to be a lot of murders in small towns. They speak English in the UK, but still, overall, that's a big
if
thing.
you're in
Not
if you're
everybody
in
does.
Wales.
Yeah, exactly. But I also wonder if the other option is, and I'm not as familiar with these kinds of games, so I could be wrong about this, but I do wonder if it's maybe useful to try some of the RPGs that use like deck building card systems. And the reason why I was thinking that is because a lot of times the cards have like color codings and labels on them, so like like on each card like what you're looking for, so even if like the actual language of something doesn't translate, people understand the function of what they're doing. I'm not familiar enough with card-based RPGs to know if that would work, but I would maybe look at it as a possibility.
Have either of you played Spire or a Sparked by the Resistance?
Yeah, I've played a lot of Heart, which is it's like the sequel game to Spire and set in the same universe, and it is sort of it feels very Blades in the Darky. It feels, you have a bunch of skills and you have a bunch of, I can't remember what they're called, but like attributes or something. And it's those like one word things that are easy to translate on a character sheet one time and then play a campaign for, that I think Karam is really responding to and saying would be an easy translation. So to me, something like Blades in the Dark also comes up, or a lot of Fortune in the Dark games feel really similar to the Spire and the Heart system, where you do have like 12 actions or whatever, and you just have to translate those kind of verbs. Maybe you have to translate like a gear list also, and then you can kind of just be done and move on with your life.
I do feel like for Blades in the Dark, or at least my experience with Fortune in the Dark hacks of that system, you get to a lot of like the rules on gameplay and like when you're supposed to activate certain moves and how you can, and the stress systems and things like that add so much complexity that the translation onus falls on that kind of side.
Totally.
And I can feel like that would be really frustrating to people.
If I was coming into this with no context, I would 100% agree. But in my mind, like the Spire as a system also has a ton of that, and Karam is like not bumping up against it. And I think the thing there is probably that like, because Karam is fluent in English, like can read all that stuff and just sort of verbally explain it to people, and they can get by that way, right? And whereas like when someone, if you're playing Blades in the Dark and you're looking at your sheet, you don't have to remember what a devil's bargain is. It's only once you get there in the process when the GM can kind of explain it to you. But you do have to be able to look at your 12 attributes and pick one. And I think that is sort of the experience that is going on in the Spire games here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And even when it comes to the attributes, you can even play it as like, just tell me what you want to do, and I will tell you which stat to roll for that.
True.
Which is also like a thing you can do. Like, so yeah.
Another couple games I would just throw out there, if like the prompt-based game feels like a fun thing for this person, would be like Fiasco. I think would work really well here, particularly I guess the card-based version might be hard because people would have cards in their hands and not be able to read them. But once you get past that initial sort of like setting the game up, it's entirely free form, just kind of like talking to each other for the most part.
Yeah.
And that would go really smoothly. And I think something like Fall of Magic would also work the same way, where there's sort of 6 prompts available at any given time, but they're each like 3 words long, and like they have pictures associated with them, and you can just kind of point and be like, I'm going to do that thing now, and then like get back into that free form, just have a conversation about it style of play.
Yeah.
I feel like that's going into specifically like low language dependency mechanics.
Yeah.
That's a really good one. Like, and things that I think we could think more about. I know that in safety tools, we do think about like people who might be colorblind or those kinds of things when you have like stoplight tool where it's like the word and it's a shape and it's a color, and you have those kinds of redundancies in order to, or not redundancies, but aspects in order to accommodate different people's needs. And I feel like it's an interesting thing to think about like when you're going into a TTRPG, that it's not just about the words. It could also be about design in terms of what graphics you're using, what can you have an icon that is associated with certain moves in order to make it easier on players who don't necessarily speak that TTRPGs language as a first language or even a second language, and to make it more universally understandable to people, and how much that could inform the tone of your game itself and like reinforce themes. Because that's, I think, one thing that we touched on before in terms of like Mass and Monster Hearts Move specifically. So much of like the language is doing a lot of tone setting and theme setting, and that's true, I think, for a lot of TTRPGs. But like, how much more could we have, or how much have you seen in other games where you're like, yes, this art specifically, or like there are parts of this character sheet and the way the character sheet is laid out really inform that as well, or help you as a player.
Yeah.
And I can't think of a specific example because my brain.
I can, but I talked a lot before this and wanted to make sure you
No,
had a
go
chance
ahead.
to get in.
Yeah, this is not a topic that I have a wealth of knowledge on. So
Yeah,
I'm happy to let you talk.
The thing that makes me think of is I've got a podcast. It's called Dice Exploder. I did a episode a while back with a friend of mine who's visually impaired, talking about Merkborg and whether it is accessible to someone who can't see, right? Because that game is notoriously really graphically intense. And his experience was like, he just read the bare bones edition, and then he came in with this like brilliant understanding of Merkborg without having like seen the visuals of it at all, because the text was also infused with it.
Yes.
And I feel like that's sort of the goal for anything like this, right? Of this is just maybe repeating what you said even, but like trying to infuse anything you would be getting out of the language also into the visuals and into everything else, and set things up. That's just literally what you said. I'm just repeating your thing.
I
think Merkborg,
although I do think that is,
really
and
cool.
Merkborg is a good example of it, I think.
I do think that might be part of what Karim is actually anxious about here, because there was a mention here about feeling the text being channeled through their understanding of it at the moment alters what make there is an aspect of like, yes, if the language of the game itself is very evocative of what the game is trying to express, then you're putting yourself in a position if you're translating of other people, of your translation being what you're giving to them.
Totally.
And so I can see that, like, I get what you're saying with it, but I think that is legitimately what the email writer was concerned about.
And that like,
oh, I guess and that's where I was saying that like the art can help reinforce what the game is looking for, and that way there's not that the entire onus isn't on the person translating. And also I would say that it might alter it some, but don't necessarily come at yourself so hard about like translating it badly. Like, yes, any translation will have the stamp of the translator on it, but that's not always a bad thing. We read books, we watch movies and with subtitles and things like that. Like, those have gone through that translation process, and part of what is so cool about translators is that they have their ideas about what the essence of a thing is and how it's best conveyed in another language based on those cultural markers as well.
Yeah, localization stuff too. Yeah.
Yes.
And also, to be fair, every time you are GMing for a table, you are translating the vision of the story through your idea of it.
Yeah.
So that might be something that you're, like, I agree with you, maybe you are overthinking it in that regard, because, like, yes, you are translating this concept, but so are people who are playing at English to English tables. So, like, that might be something to give yourself I mean, if it's frustrating, it's not fun for you, then obviously don't do that. But if that is a concern, I would say, like, that might be the more minimal concern than the other issues you were having with that table.
Totally.
But obviously, we're not going to say like yes, you must take on this like huge cognitive load. Like, no.
That's the bigger concern with it, for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we did that one.
Yeah, and I think also seeking out games that have translations, because there are a lot of games that do, and so, like, look for that. Like, someone might have done like work for you already. So
yeah, that's true.
Unfortunately, that does tend to be more the bigger, like, major party games, but there are examples of it. So
yeah, and I think also some languages get more translations than others.
For sure, absolutely.
Someone in Turkey probably is not getting a lot of translations.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a very good point.
And I'm really interested to hear what is going into your Sparked by the Resistance game, Karam. So if you want to email us an update on how that's going and what kinds of things that your desperate struggle is being evoked there, I would love to hear about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll take number 2.
Go for it.
Mailbag number 2. Dear Bluebity and the Blorbities. Note to self, come back and think of a clever address line later. I write to you with one of my most cherished gaming memories and a conversation starter. Some years ago, I decided to run the Age of Rebellion beginner box from the FFG Star Wars line for my 2 sons, who were 16 and 10 at the time. As a quick aside, regardless what you think of the actual game, the FFG Star Wars beginner boxes are hands down the best starter set. I will die on that hill. Anyway, the basic premise of the adventure involves infiltrating a secret Empire listening base. Moff Dardano, the dude in charge of the base, was spying on his own political rivals, so it became keenly interesting to the Rebel Alliance. It was split up into a 3-act structure with the PCs infiltrating the base and disabling the General's escape shuttle, the alarms being raised, and the Moff escaping into the jungle on an AT-ST, and a thrilling speeder chase to catch him. My boys didn't do any of that. They did something better. The set came with a big fold-out map of the base. I decided that Rebel Intel managed to get the floor plans and handed my kids the map at the start of the adventure. They saw that the armory was pretty close to the entrance they came in, so they decided to beeline it there and steal some stormtrooper uniforms. Of course, someone busted them while they were changing and managed to pull the alarm before they took him out. By the time more stormtroopers showed up, their costumes were complete, and they said rebels broke into the base and killed this guy. They ran when they saw us, and we pulled the alarm. From there, they headed to the shuttle that they were supposed to be sabotaging. Instead, they insisted they were extra bodies being added to the Moff security detail. Unfortunately, the bluff didn't go off perfectly, and the jig was up. A fight broke out, but it was contained. Only a few trusted bodyguards were with the Moff due to limited seating in the shuttle. The plucky rebels won, snagged Ralph Dardano, and used his own shuttle to escape. It was cleared to launch, so no one thought to shoot them down. My kids short-circuited the entire adventure and probably left 2/3 of the material on the cutting room floor. I remember looking over the adventure afterwards and thinking, yeah, that makes way more sense. The RPG bug didn't end up burrowing under their skin, but we still talk about their incredible mission from time to time. Are there any stories from your own tables where the players short-circuited an adventure, either pre-written or your own, but made it way more awesome as a result? Thanks for everything. Always nevers in the Discord. P.S. I feel like there's something I'm forgetting. Oh well.
I think it was their name. Yeah.
Always
Also,
nevers.
Probably
I
to tell
believe.
us to drink.
Is
Oh,
the name.
that's the name.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I thought it was a saying.
Yes. Yeah, I think that this is just like how RPGs are meant to be played.
Yeah, I
and
agree.
Obviously, like all of us will like tell fun stories, I'm sure here, but like I think there's a classic thing of a GM getting frustrated because things have gone off the rails, and like the sooner you can give that up and just sort of like have a fun time with your kids running and doing their heists, like the better off you're gonna be and the more fun you're gonna have.
Yeah, I think a beginner kit especially is a little bit overwritten usually because it's designed to be a little more on rails in case people don't go off and do things. So it's
And
like
for the GM's support too.
yeah, absolutely. So I think like it's to guide the GM, guide the players, and also because there's potential that the players are going to do lots of different things, so they want to have all the possible contingencies ready to go because they're assuming the GM is not someone who's experienced with it. So I think they did this exactly right.
Yeah.
And I think that the fact that the Always Nevers was running it and knows how to run games was able to adapt to that. Whereas I think some GMs might have been like, no, sorry, you wouldn't have that map. That's not that you have to get it later. Like so.
Yeah.
I think this just gives me so much joy. I love that it was like, okay, oh look, here's where they stashed the uniforms.
Yeah.
And it was like, your kids were so much more successful at this than like Luke and Han were. That's
Yeah.
what I'm saying, and I appreciate that so much. I'm trying to think of like one specific game where we just took it in such a like. I know that we've done this to Jason several times. And Jason is always like, that's one of the great things about having Jason as a GM is he is so great about just going with the flow that you almost don't know as a player, like, whether or not, like, he had something else in his back pocket, or if it was just like, okay, I know that y'all are great, and we're going to play into this. Let me...
I have one.
I have one
Oh.
too. Yeah.
Go.
Oh.
You should go.
Right.
You sure?
Yeah,
Well, okay. I just spoke, so I can have happy.
I mean, it's not
Okay.
it's not a class.
I'm currently I don't want to be attention hog. I currently am running D&D at it was a summer camp, and now we're meeting once a week on Sundays, and so I'm running D&D for a bunch of kids. And the table that I happen to have right now that I'm doing for this fall session are chaotic as heck. Like it's wild. And we're doing the starter set. We're doing the Lost Mine of Phandelver. We're possibly leading into Phandelver and beyond, which is like the longer expanded version of that story. But there's a whole thing where once they've done like the first encounter in the Goblin Cave, they actually go to the town of Phandelver or Phandalin, and then they like find out that the town's being like sieged by bandits, and there's like usually like a lot of steps towards like, oh, there's a kid on this farm who heard some wind rustling, and you go in this tunnel or whatever, and there's all these things or like if they don't engage the bandits, they come to this tavern and start stuff. The kids went right to the tavern that the hangout of the bandits, and offered to join the bandits, with their plan being to get into the bandits like hideout and then kill them all inside their own hideout. And so that was their plan. And so I called their bluff, and I had the bandit leader be like, okay, if you want to join us, you have to prove your loyalty to us, so you need to burn down the other tavern. And the kids went, okay. And then they went back to the other tavern, and they told the tavern owner, hey, we have to burn your tavern down as part of our cover, but if you let us do that, we'll rid the town of the bandits, and when they're all done, we will promise to help you rebuild your tavern. And so then, like, it was such a ridiculously weird concept that I said yes, and I let them do it. Especially because we're running these games, they're only about 2-hour sessions anyway, so, like, efficiency of time is really important on these. And so I was kind of like, great. And so I just basically chucked out like the entire map of this hideout, where normally like you're sneaking through it and like taking out people piece by piece or whatever, and I just like had them go back to the hideout, get initiated, and then I just dropped them. I like, okay, you wake up after a long rest and you are now deep in the like recesses of this weird hideout, and the big bad is right there, basically. And it was great, and it was just like I never ever would have thought of, yes, go ahead and burn down a building to join this gang. And when they first pitched, like, yeah, we'll burn the building down, I had to stop and go, y'all understand that you're supposed to be heroes, right? Like, you're supposed to be good care. And like they were like, oh no, we'll rebuild it, that'll be fine. I was like, you know what? It's such a weird idea that I'm just gonna let them do it. So I didn't want to negate. A lot of them are new players, like brand new players. So I wanted to make sure like they understand, like, yes, you can make wild choices and it will happen. And because they're very chaotic. I had to spend a lot of time herding cats with these kids. So when they collectively had a plan that they all agreed was like going to be fun and weird, I'm like,
Reward
okay,
those
go with
children.
it.
You gotta let them. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even if they were 50-year-old dudes, like you gotta do the thing that's exciting. That's
It's
such
so
a cool
fun.
idea.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
so
Amazing. I love that.
I'm watching Justified right now, and it sounds like just an episode of Justified to me. But,
It really kind of does.
yeah, it's fabulous. I have a story of running 5e. The party had like made it into this fairy guy's like traveling mansion that had previously come to a town and like abducted all the guests of a wedding. And they're like, the guests of the wedding are hiding somewhere. And the guy in charge, he's like, what, he'd done it for like good reason. I can't remember the deal was, but he wasn't like a bad guy. Like somehow, like all of this had happened kind of by mistake. And he's hanging out in his house. They've snuck into his house, and the rogue like finds him by himself, just like hanging out. And she's like, I'm gonna push him down the stairs. I'm gonna just push him down the stairs and kill him. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, I push him down the stairs. She rolled a 20 or something. He rolled a nat 1, and I was like, okay, he's dead.
Yeah.
Right? He's dead. You killed, like, the dice fell where they laid, and like you killed this guy, and now you're sort of like trapped in his house, and like there's no one in charge anymore, and like total nonsense is about to happen. And I really saw that as like a moment to learn. It's a little sort of adjacent to this, but that like just let the dice fall where they lay and then like run with it. Like when someone has a plan and they like roll, like don't rob people of that. Like I
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
took that away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there was there was a game I played in many years ago now, but it was the Alien game. And we all went into this game with the best of intentions. And so our ship went to investigate, like we got a kind of a distress signal from a droid from another ship as part of the corporation. We were duty bound by contracts to go check it out, and then we found that it was a science station. They had been overrun. Pretty much everybody was dead. And then we had a xenomorph was coming for us, and we did like any reasonable people would do, and we saved the cat. And the cat had a litter of babies on the way back to our ship. And it turns out that in this one case, that what we had done was bring the little, like, constantly breeding cat xenomorph queen back onto our ship.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
no.
And as we took care of these cats, like, because none of us really, like, were able to separate cat and xenomorph.
Yeah, it'd be tough. Yeah.
So we came up with all of these kind of, like, weird and different solutions to how to deal with all of these little baby xenomorphs, because none of us wanted to hurt the kitties.
That's funny.
Um
You inevitably became Florgan farmers.
and so and like one of them
Florgan.
imprinted on the on one of my fellow players and was like, "Mommy!" But as it grew, much like cats do, or at least, you know, mine, wasn't realizing, like, oh, okay, your saliva is like, this cat's saliva is burning a hole in you.
Yeah.
Or like their claws are now xenomorph claws. So instead of like lashing onto you cutely, they're lashing onto like into your body. I think my favorite moment of that was actually like, I was rolling quite poorly, if I remember correctly, like most of the game. And then, but at the end, my character had a light up award that had like different flashing lights on it. And I used it as a cat distraction toy as I like ran to the ship to get away. It was basically like it was really fun. And it turns out, like, when we finished that game, the GM was like, wow, that was not like, because originally the queen had hitched a ride on the ship, but instead, because we were just so into these cats, that we just took it a completely different direction.
So
and we
funny.
had like the most traumatizing and yet bloodless on the xenomorph side game of Alien possible. So it was a lot of fun. And like and where Happy Jacks has like no harm to animals, especially no harm to pets, and some other lines that we do not cross as a channel. This was not on Happy Jacks. This was elsewhere, where that was not one of our lines.
Fair.
In case anyone is like, who Happy Jacks doing? No, it was not. It was not here. I think one of the things that's so much fun on both the GM and player side is just having that freedom to pivot. And one topic that we talk about, I think, several times on the show prior is prep versus, like, if you're a prepper or you're a pantser. And this, I think, can kind of like meld those two things together. If you have all the prep, but then you aren't so married to it that you can't pants it if your players are willing to go in a different direction, that it can be so much fun. Like, Riley, in your story where you were like, okay, well, I had all this stuff and I just chucked it.
Yeah.
This was amazing.
Yeah, I'm a pantser through and through, so I'm always happy when I get an opportunity to truly pants. Like, yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Well, I think the thing, I'm also a pantser, but like a prepper would, I think the ideal form of a prepper is you do a lot of prep so that when this opportunity comes up, you're prepared and like you know what to do. Like, you know, there's certainly a kind of prepper who just wants to kind of like tell their railroad story, and a kind of player who's like along for that ride, right? But I think a lot of preppers are sort of like, yeah, I want to know what the general store manager's like lunch regular is, so that when that comes up in play, like, and it's a linchpin of one of these cool like diversions, I'm ready for it.
Yeah, and even in this case, like, this would not have happened if it wasn't for a great deal of prep. Like, for example, the map of the base.
Exactly,
Like, they only were able to do things because you gave them a map of the base that they were able to check out and see things. So, like, even if you're running a starter set kit and you're running on a seat of your pants, a lot of people put a lot of prep into that starter kit to make it a place where you could play that kind of game.
Totally.
So,
And it's so much fun to hear, like, because sometimes I have encountered in the wild people who are like, oh, scenarios, kind of, if you've seen one, why are you watching another AP of one or whatever? And it's like, not only, especially, every table that you play a scenario with is going to be so wildly different.
yeah.
But also that, like, you still have the opportunity to have something go completely off the rails. I just thought of another example that was from Happy Jacks. We played with Chris Gray, Temple of Elemental Evil in one of the systems that Chris was kind of trialing here for a one-shot Saturday. So it wasn't D&D, but it was the Temple of Evil story.
Mm-hmm.
And we instigated the unionization of the dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
And then our
Tends
party...
to happen a lot on Happy
Classic.
Jack shows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we went on to form a company that redesigned dungeons, much like home renovation shows on HGTV.
Nice.
And
Is that a game? That feels like that should exist.
I would love that to exist as
Yeah.
a TTRPG.
Yeah.
If someone could do that for me, and then write
Better
it and
Homes
tell
and
me all
Dungeons.
about it.
Yeah.
Send us a review copy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had one time where I had a GM who, this was a little bit more of a derailing, but it was very funny, is we were playing a D&D game set in the plane of Theros, where I apologize to listeners if I told a story on the show before, but it was a arena battle setup. We were kind of like going to be fighting in a Colosseum, because Theros is very Greek myth, somewhat Roman, but mostly Greek myth based. And so we were in this Colosseum, and the GM spent all this time having all these NPCs talk up this monster we were gonna fight named Kirby that ended up being a Cerebus, and it was like an hour of gameplay of us like before the arena being told how fierce Kirby was and getting into it and getting set up and going to
Who's
it.
a good
And
boy?
we finally get to the arena, and I'm like, so Cerebus is from the like underworld plane of Theros, right? Like they're like, yeah, so he's not from this plane, and he's like, yeah, and I go, okay, cool, and I cast banishment on my very first turn, and I said, and I go, cool, I'm just gonna sit here and hold this concentration for a minute, and then he won't come back because he's gonna go back to his own plane after that minute's up. And it was so funny because there was he hadn't put any other minions out on the field, so it was just us and Kirby, and so in my very first turn, I cast the one spell that would completely negate Kirby from being
Oh
in the
my
game.
goodness.
And it was like, we had to like, and like, sure enough, like, he had to like fly by, like have everybody else go, okay, if you bring Kirby back, we won't make you fight him anymore. And like always like, we like Kirby here, we don't want him to be gone, so please bring him back and like make me stop doing banishment. It was very funny.
Like, no, best puppers come back.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
I
It was
love
very,
that.
I felt very evil that day, and I could tell the GM had not thought about banishment as a possible spell to be used in this scenario. So it was like, it was just so great because he had hyped up this fight so long, and it was over
Yeah.
in one round.
I have one like that too, actually. When I was in like fourth grade playing, me and my three buddies, and my dad was running games for us, right?
Nice.
We're like playing a game, we like fight a dragon, like our first dragon like comes out, and we're like, 6 sessions in by this point or something, and my friend is just like, hey, I got this like wand of weather that I like randomly started with. Our dragon's cold-blooded, and my dad is like, geez, what am I gonna do? Like punish the 8-year-old for like knowing a fun fact about lizards, and like no, so you just like we made it snow and the dragon like collapsed, and that was the end of the fight. It was
Love
it was a
that.
great
I
game.
love it. That's so
Yeah.
good.
Oh. Okay. Mailbag 3 from the archive, deep in the bowels of 2020. Hello, Jackers. I have a confession to make. I have never played Dungeons and Dragons. I have only strong prejudices based on blog posts, podcasts, including yours, and some actual play videos. Lately, I started to listen to one actual play podcast where they played D&D in their own homebrew setting. I'm now 6 hours in, and they have stolen food rations from a store and traveled to a street toll where they are demanded money. I would say nothing notable has happened for the story. In the stealing episode, they rolled dice multiple times. Perception, stealth, agility checks during the scene in a very minutiae way. I went to move downstairs. Roll a stealth check. Pass. Guards move here. What do? I move to upstairs. Roll a stealth check. Luckily, they didn't fail any of those checks, or at least not badly. Now, I look at a role-playing session like a movie or a television series episode. You should concentrate on interesting events, hand-waving the rest. To keep the story going, you should resolve petty scenes quickly and concentrate in detail on the interesting ones. Just like in a movie, we don't see everything the characters do unless it has a meaning. Of course, this is also a way of play question, as others prefer the other way of play, kind of play. My question is, what does D&D as a system gear players into playing like that? My question is that does D&D as a system gear players into playing like that? Can you resolve puny scenes quickly? Can you roll once for the contest of stealing enough food for your travel? Can you roll once for a fight, or is it against the style of D&D? Is it baked into the system that players find the fun in a mundane food ration collection scene? I am planning to participate in a D&D one-shot in a future con to patch the hole in my education. I have already mentally readied myself to play a story where there is a couple of checks and then the final battle for the whole 4-hour slot. This sounds a little sour, but it is just my prejudices protecting me from a letdown. Please say that there is, somewhere, a D&D game where you don't spend your hours rolling if a guard spots you again and again, and whether you succeed in all 3 agility checks when maneuvering the door, spending a good hour on a scene that doesn't really matter for the story. Please tell me this is only my bias and the role-playing world is, in reality, a better place. Juho from Finland.
I'd love to hear the follow-up to this to see if Juho went and played at a con and what it was like. Because also, even cons, I feel like it can be really hit or miss which tape. Like, even this year at StrategicCon, I played in 2 different Adventurers League games, one with Jason and one without. The GM at the first table was very fun and lighthearted and was able to didn't make us roll for every single thing, and it was fine. The second table also didn't make us roll for every single thing, but was also a lot less conducive to the silly role playing, which is unfortunate because the table, we'd all decided to play goblins at the table, and we all had like weird goofy little goblins, so we were all doing bits and stuff like that.
Oops,
and
all goblins!
Yeah, and oops all goblins, except for one player who would join the table last minute and did not know the game and did not know the bit we were doing, and so it was just there also. It was very funny.
Well, you also that's like it's human Smurf.
Yeah.
right? Like it's the
one human amongst Muppets. Yeah,
I
and
was
it
about to say, it's like
yeah.
when you recast the Muppet movies and there's or recast a movie with all Muppets but one human remains.
Yeah. But I would say that as I think that I'm like the resident D&D apologist on Happy Jacks, and I think that's why Kimmy picked this email, because I was going to be here tonight. I don't think this is a good example of D&D being played on average. I do think there are some players, especially players I think who come from the older versions, like the old, like very first and second edition might be very crunchy, but that's also a lot more just exploring dungeons and a lot less talking to shopkeepers and stuff like that. I think that it does depend on the DM, so I would say that. But I do think that most DMs, myself included, I tend to do like a stealth check, and that is your stealth check for the scene. That is not your stealth check for every corner you're going around, unless something majorly significant happens that might impact that. And sometimes even, especially for a podcast, like I don't want to judge another podcaster because I haven't heard the show in question. I don't know what was actually happening in it. But for me, it's like if you're making TTRPG content for an audience, you do have to kind of have some level of like, this needs to be engaging and entertaining, and just having people say rolls for every single possible thing you can do is going to really drag it down. 6 hours of saying nothing has happened in 6 hours. Like, this is literally all that's happened in 6 hours. I would be bored at that table. But I know there are some people who love that. So I don't want to say that's like not the right way to play D&D, but I would say that what I would say is, to answer Juho's question, I don't think the rules specifically gear people to play that. In fact, if you read, especially the newer books, they even say, like, don't make people check for all these things. I'm just like, there's actually, like, things saying, unless you want to. But they're like, I would say that, I'm rambling, I'm sorry. I don't think the rules as written enforce this kind of play, but I do think there are players who like that kind of play, and that will be the table culture. And that's okay. That's their table culture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I agree, like, I've played my fair share of D&D in older systems and then less in 5e, just as I've branched out, like, basically I find a new TTRPG and I want to play it.
Yeah.
And that has happened to me, umpteen number of times, so it just means I don't play D&D quite as much anymore, but it is absolutely that D&D as a system does not force you into minutia. I will say D&D as a system does make combat complicated.
Combat yeah.
And that is not a unique to D&D issue. There are plenty of systems where combat is complicated and turns take a long time. And that just, some systems are crunchier than others. But like, I do hope that you had a good con game experience, Juho, and I also hope that you found an actual play that was playing D&D that was more suited to your taste.
Yeah, or another game entirely if you need to.
Yeah, and I think, like, I mean, it's easy to say, like, cool. I mean, Critical Role is a really great example of how that isn't necessary and isn't a thing that has to happen.
Yeah, and Critical Role is a pretty crunchy D&D storytelling show. Like, sometimes they do quite, but, like, it doesn't feel like it drags down. So, yeah, it's a good example of a show that is not rules light, but is still very high on narrative and does not bog down the narrative with rules. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that comes, like, also can inform a table in general. Is, I know that I was like the first time I GM'd a game, like, it was like, okay, you don't know, even if you kind of like have a sense of it before because you've played a lot, you don't necessarily know how often you need to be making your players roll for stuff.
Yeah.
Like, okay, how does this flow work? And you're finding your footing. So it's something that I think that you see more with newer GMs versus more experienced GMs who just know, like, are able to navigate those waters more easily. And so it's not necessarily even a thing that any system is so intuitive with, but, like, the amount of experience you have running games in general, and then D&D specifically, where you're presented, like, or something like, since I brought it up earlier, like a Call of Cthulhu, where there are so many things, like stats that people could be rolling. Like, it's like several columns worth, and you're like, okay, do I need to be, like, how many times do I need to be making my players roll these things?
Yeah.
And figuring that out can just be a bit of a learning process. Or you have a table, like you said, like, especially in home games, I think that stuff can be so much fun.
Yeah.
Because it is just, it can lead to so much, like, fun ridiculousess.
Sometimes you just want to hear the dice shake, you
Yeah.
know?
That too.
Yeah.
How
I
many
love it.
times can
Yeah.
this person fail a roll in a row?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, like, going back to what we were saying about D&D and Critical Role specifically, and like crunchiness and stuff like that. Like Matt Mercer loves to set up really elaborate battle maps that he spends a lot of time building. As a result of that, you will have combats on Critical Role that might, the show's on average about 4 hours long, but they've had like 7, 8, 10-hour games sometimes of a podcast, of a streaming show, because they're doing these elaborate with monsters and area of effect things and layer actions, things like that. Then you get D&D shows like The Adventure Zone or Dungeons and Daddies, where they forget they're playing D&D sometimes, and like they admit that, and they like laugh at it, and like for them, like especially Adventure Zone, like most combats on Adventure Zone will typically only last for half the episode at most, because that they want to do goofs, they want to play around. They'll be playing D&D most of the time, but they'll move past it. Now there are some exceptions to that, but typically like that's not the show they're trying to do, and they're both playing D&D, and so it really shows that you can do everything with D&D. And also, to kind of combine Happy Jacks with Critical Role, I always think about a moment with our lovely Abria, where she was GMing. I think it was her first time GMing at Critical Role. I can't remember if it was YouTube. She does a lot, so it's hard. But I remember there was a scene where there was a particular check that, like a door or like a lock or something, that people weren't getting past, and it just kept happening. And so finally she went, I've spiritually moved on from this, and so stopped making people do rolls or checks for it, because she was like, you guys have tried everything, the scene has moved on, and so I'm just going to be done with this, and we're going to move forward, it's fine. But it was very funny to have her on camera say, I've spiritually moved on from this, let's go. And I think I've accidentally stolen that a couple of times, because it's like popped in my head while doing something.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I want to go back to a couple of things. One that you just said about like D&D can do everything.
Yeah.
And I feel like D&D, and something that you were saying earlier about how D&D is like open-ended, and it's kind of like a learning curve to like get up to, how often should you be calling a roll as a DM.
Yeah. I want to say, I don't think it can do everything. I know that's a very touchy subject for some TTRPG people, so I want to make sure we're saying that. I'm saying the two examples we were talking about are both feasible in D&D. I don't want to be people going like, you gotta stop shoehorning these into D&D. I think you can do a lot with it, but
well, that's part of what I wanted to going to say next. But like, I think D&D is a very flexible game in exactly the way that you are describing, and in part because of the sort of open-endedness for the DM of like, how often do you want to call for rolls? Like, I have friends who just want to hear those dice roll and like want to roll a lot of 20s and 1s to like make sure crazy stuff is happening, and like that's the way they want to play. And I have friends who just want to do what the McElroys do, right? And just kind of like do goofs, and then like occasionally remember that we're playing a game.
Yeah.
And both of those are great. And I think, but I think that flexibility, one, leads to the problem that you were kind of putting your finger on of like, D&D is not a game that gives as much guidance to its DM as I would like in the kinds of games that I like, or in like a Powered by the Apocalypse kind of world. Like it's, in Apocalypse world, like with moves are very clear at all times about whether you should be rolling them or not, right? It's the bar for the DM knowing when people should be rolling dice is much lower, because it's baked right there into the rules. It's so specific. But that means that you get something more specific instead of something that is more open-ended, that can do and accommodate a lot more styles of play, like we've kind of been talking about here. I just think that's sort of interesting and something to point out about the whole conversation that this letter is sort of coming from.
And I would say, like, this kind of, it's funny because, like, we talk a lot about D&D as, like, one of the pitfalls of D&D is there are all these rules and there's all these checks and it can be so complicated. And I'm like, and that can be true. I am still now making a character in 5e is so much easier than it used to be, and I'm still, like, a little like, oh, let me sit down. I'm going to have to devote the whole of the next hyper-focus to this event, because otherwise I will mess it up. But that's a lot. Also because, like, I don't play in the system very often. But the one thing I would like to point out is, like, we all love Traveler, which is an incredibly crunchy system with a lot of different skills and a lot of different rules and a lot of different other stuff. So it is not just like a series of complexities.
Yeah.
And technically, I guess, like, Traveler is one of those games where, like, rather than being more combat forward and combat focused like D&D is, it is much more like one of the Trail of Cthulhu, Call of Cthulhu games, where if you're getting in a gun, like in an actual like firefight, you've done major wrong in the system and you're not going to get out necessarily okay. Like power fantasy, it is not.
Yeah.
But I think like some of it is just the stigma of like, oh, different systems, different like, oh, now we're in 5e, or people have. Sometimes it can feel like D&D has gone through the Spider-Man treatment, where it is like, okay, it's not my older brother Spider-Man, now it is my Spider-Man.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But they're two completely different Spider-Mans.
Yeah.
Or now it is like my, teenage cousin Spider-Man, which like Miles Morales. Yes, I'll take it.
For sure. And that's interesting because you mentioned the people who want to play D&D like the McElroys.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of why I am glad I will proudly brand myself as the D&D apologist on this channel is because I never liked D&D growing up. Because it was such a crunchy dungeon crawly kind of game, and it wasn't what I was into. The games that I bit my teeth on and like what I got through with was what's wrong? I was playing Vampire a lot and Werewolf and like the White Wolf games, which are also fairly crunchy but are huge storytelling kind of games. And those are the games that drew me in. And I would talk to D&D players about the role playing games that I was playing that were like these White Wolf, like World Darkness games, and they would be like flabbergasted because they just wanted to go into a room, kill the monster, get the loot. Go in the room, kill the monster, get the loot. They didn't want to play characters. They wanted to play essentially a video game with dice and things like that. And I was like, oh, well, that's not for me. It's boring. And I had tried to play D&D one time with a group that was in 3rd edition. I think it was 3.5. And they kind of had that vibe. And I had written this huge elaborate backstory for my character. And like I was like excited to play her. And then all we did was explore a dungeon and fight monsters. And we never got into backstory or anything. And so I was like, okay, well, why did I spend that time building this character then? And then never went back. And so I didn't play D&D again for a long time. And then it was the McElroys actually listening to the Adventure Zone. They got to like the 3rd arc, I think it was, 3rd or 4th arc, where it's Pedals to the Metal, where they suddenly have this elaborate Mad Max style battle with like battle wagons on like an open field. And the way that they did it was they just they rolled initiative, and then the next 3 episodes, it was just people jumping from car to car and like doing different things in cars and things like that. It wasn't combat per se, but it was run like combat, but everybody had a chance to like flavor it and do wild things. And I remember like going, wait, you can do this with D&D? This is amazing. And I actually like, that's what made me go back and pick up 5th edition and get really into it. And so like I have fallen in love with the system, having come back to it from playing all these different kinds of games, stuff like that. So it's so funny whenever someone's like, I implore you to try a different game. I'm like, I have, and I love other games. I mentioned the one sheet games earlier. I love PBTA games with quite a passion. I like Kids on Bikes, and like I will try almost any system if I'm being asked to play it, and I'll try my best. It's hard for me with my ADHD to like really get into the nitty gritty of a new system, and sometimes I feel like I'm behind, and I'll frustrate GMs because I'm like learning as I play. But I will do it, and I quite enjoy it. But I don't know, for me, there is something about now that I have fully embraced D&D, and it pays some of my bills, to be fair, so to play my bias. For me, it's almost like, the way I talk about it is, when I was in high school in the Midwest, when we played cards, we always played euchre. And that was what I understood cards to be, was euchre. And have like a very limited set of cards, and that was how I played cards. Suddenly, poker became the most like popular game like everywhere else too. Like, I mean, poker was always popular, but that's when like World Series of Poker came on.
I was about to say, like when VH1 or wherever it was showing like all the World Series of Poker games, and then they had the celebrity ones and all of that stuff. Like poker became everybody's favorite game. Yeah,
and so people were playing, and then look, people have been playing poker games like since poker existed. Like it's always like it's been a thing, especially amongst guys, to have like poker. And I was living as a man back then, so like there was always like, oh, we're at poker night, and I had never learned to play poker because I had always played euchre, and it's a very local game to a very specific part of the country. But then even the people in Ohio were playing poker, and I didn't know the rules to poker, and so I just stopped playing cards. And that's kind of how I felt about D&D, where I was like, oh, I don't know how to play this game. Everyone who plays role-playing games plays D&D, so I don't play role-playing games or whatever. And now, what I like about now that I play D&D, I'm like, oh, I like that I know the game that has this very common language amongst a lot of role-playing gamers. And I feel like that's why, like, I do tend to lean more into the everything can happen in D&D mindset, because I've seen such wildly different versions of how D&D can be played. And
Well, yeah, and I think that on the one hand that is completely true in the
also,
game.
I'm way off topic. I apologize.
Well, the game
No,
is
no, it's
super
great.
built to be that way, right? But
Yeah.
it is also the case that, like, because the game is built that way, it is like, because the game is built that way, you had the first experience that you did.
Yeah.
Because it's trying to be such a big tent
Yeah.
that, like, you can walk into the tent and think you are on this side of it and actually be on this side of it and just,
Yeah.
like, not actually have a conversation with the person next to you that you think you're having.
Yeah,
You know?
and I do think 5e is better about that.
Totally.
That's one thing I think, like what we were talking about earlier about people saying like, oh, D&D is too complicated with combat, but the other games are too. And like, I think that a lot of things that I hear people say like stop trying to make D&D do these things, and like, yes, James, I understand that poker was very popular in Texas. It's in every cowboy film and everything. Yeah, it's a very popular. It's the King's game. It's literally, yes. I'm just saying, in my neck of the woods, poker became more popular than it ever was before. All right, so yeah, D&D. I think a lot of when I hear people like, you can't do that in D&D, or D&D doesn't let you do that. And then I'll go back and like, I'll even like look in the rules. I'm like, I don't really know what they're saying you can't do. Like, I think that they have met a lot of people who play D&D a certain way. And like you said, I think it really depends on what edition they're playing, because I do think that 3rd edition was more geared towards that kind of play. And I think that everybody I knew who was playing it that way was playing that edition, and especially 1st and 2nd editions. But I don't think 5e is. I think 5e is a much more broad system than it ever has been, and especially the newest version that just came out. So I do think there's a lot more flexibility with the game than it used to have.
And I think there's an interesting conversation to be had about like what games are going for. And D&D is going to get the broadest audience possible. So it has left itself open in a lot of ways to do that. And that's part of the reason why we have so much of a shared cultural language around D&D now, depending on which ones of the very popular APs you follow who are playing D&D
Sure.
and their styles.
Yes, for sure.
And it's an interesting thing, and one thing that I would love to see, like, to really, really divert topic, I would love to see that for different TTRPGs, like different game systems.
Yeah.
Because I think that there's something really, like, and you do see it with Vampire the Masquerade, because there's such a variety of shows out there that, like, Vampire the Masquerade is a system, but it is also now a genre of TTRPG actual play in a way that, like, is so cool to me. Or, like, maybe genre is not particularly the perfect word to say, but kind of like how you can have dramedies that are just so completely different from each other.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah, I bumped the table.
okay. And so, like, I want to see that with more systems, because I just think it's so much fun when we get to see all that creativity of, like, now that we're not completely past, but, like, people have branched out more from just wanting to imitate Matt Mercer, just wanting to imitate the McElroys, or, you know, that kind of thing, and, like, been like, oh, I can put my own spin on this. And to bring it all the way back around, much like our amazing indie designer of the month,
Audrey Stolze.
Sorry, that is not the right back page. Much like our October Indie Designer of the Month, Audrey Stolze, aka Lady Tabletop, who has made Spaceships and Star Worms, which is an overlay for D&D 5e. Thank you very much for tuning in to the HappyJacksrpg podcast. This has been season 34, episode 15. Please support Lady Tabletop by visiting her at ladytabletop.itch.io or hopepunkpress.com. And thank you to our amazing chat mod, James V, and our Patreons who keep us ad-free and independent. You can join their ranks at happyjacks.org/Patreon. We have some fun bonus material that gets uploaded to the Patreon, like Nerding Out, where you can hear a group of Happy Jackers come together and talk about things that they really care about with a unholy passion for an hour, and it's a lot of fun. You can also find, don't forget to go to the Happy Jacks Discord and vote on when our next game days will be in November. I am Pooja.
I am Riley.
I'm Sam D.
And today we will leave you with Happy Jack's Undrinkable Ale by the Poxy Boggards. You can find the Poxy Boggards at poxyboggards.com. Have a great night.
Good sailors sing songs of lassies and bravery and fortune. How the sea fills their hearts with the courage to do mighty deeds. But I'll sing a song of a lad that I met in Jamaica, who tested the bravest of brave in all 7 seas. It were
Happy Jack's undrinkable ale. One mighty sup puts the wind in your sail. It's Happy Jack's undrinkable ale.
Our captain once tried a tankard of Jack's mighty potion. He seemed all right, so we all went off to bed. Woo! To the screams of our captain way up in the crow's nest. He tried to fly with the wind, but he ended up dead.
Happy Jack's undrinkable ale. One mighty sup puts the wind in your sail. It's Happy Jack's undrinkable ale.
I sailed with a lad who was tall and as wide as a mountain. 1/2 a pint with the sailor down upon one knee. And we watched as he turned as white as the high cliffs of Dover, and then threw up old Jack's as a gift to the mighty blue sea. We're
Happy Jack's undrinkable ale. One mighty sup puts the wind in your sail. It's Happy Jack's undrinkable ale.
This sail was as black as the night with no moon in December, as bitter as a man who'd lost his pizzle in May, as strong as 6 horses, as wicked and evil as Judas. Of Jack's, the worldliest drinker would most surely say,
Happy Jack's undrinkable ale. One mighty sup puts the wind in your sail. It's Happy Jack's undrinkable ale.
I once tried a thimble of Jack's demonic invention, but for the spinning I felt that I was all right. I awoke with a chicken, 2 ducks, a lamb, and an oxen. By the looks on their faces, I must have had a good night. I need
Happy Jack's undrinkable ale. One mighty sup puts the wind in your sail. It's Happy Jack's undrinkable ale. Happy Jack's undrinkable ale. One mighty sup puts the wind in your sail. It's Happy Jack's undrinkable ale.